Well, I'm slightly under the weather from a 2-day flu, so I don't know how well this is going to come off. Let's see. Jerry will probably come in late because I know he wanted to come. We're going to meet every week now, next week and the week following. And then we'll break until the 19th of January. I'll take a long break. 18th, was it? All right. The week after next. See, next week will probably be the 7th, and the week after will be the 14th, I believe. He's the facts man. He'll catch me on any mistake I make. All right. We have somebody new, so we'll have to sort of review. This is the 6th year of ongoing talks on mysticism and mythology. Probably as much mysticism as mythology. And this year we're in the middle of a new cycle, or a new series of talks, and they're all on myths involving triangles, in order to understand the triangular principle of manifest spirit. And we're going at an incredibly slow pace. We're in our 4th talk on the myth of Oedipus, and we're using as source material the Oedipus the King by Sophocles, who was an Eleusinian initiate. And where we left off last time, we left off with Oedipus standing in front of the palace at Thebes, and or Cadmea, if you like the ancient name, and he was talking to the populace, and he was both consoling them, and he was at the same time asking them questions, admitting ignorance, because the oracle had come back and said that the source of the plague and all of the terrible suffering that was taking place at Thebes was because the murderer of the previous king, Laius, had not been expelled from the country, and the country therefore was polluted and was in necessity of purification before all of the plagues would leave. And last time we looked at that very fact that Oedipus was both assuring the people that he would get to the bottom of things, as he did when he first came to Thebes by solving the riddle of the Sphinx, but at the same time he was questioning them. And from there we launched into a really long, deep, fundamental study of the notion of common sense, or the will of the people, or the question of the validity of external knowledge. If the truth is deeply within in spirit, how can we look without for knowledge or for validity, or how can we look for the ignorant masses for the truth? And we eventually broke it down into the absolute level, or an absolute level, we looked at the principle of triangulation that is used in navigation, but we looked at it as a general study relating to momental consciousness, or the consciousness of a point, or dualistic consciousness, consciousness of a line or linear consciousness, versus the objective consciousness relative to both the known and the unknown that comes from a triangle. We ended up by relating the fact that a triangle and a circle, both the symbols of spirit, were one and the same thing, because in order to draw a circle, you needed a compass, and that compass was in fact a triangle relative to the circle. And then we looked a little bit at counting, or the numerical equivalent of counting 1, 2, 3, and we eventually came to understand the process of objectification through something we've talked about before, what lightly we call playing make-believe for keeps, or realizing the dream. In the process where the known or spirit realizes, in realizing its own being, it realizes the potentiality of something more, something that could be, something that is unknown. So that immediately in the process of knowing, immediately in that process is developed a silhouette with the unknown. And that the process of the unknown becoming known is accomplished by projecting a dream. And that projection of the dream becomes an interface where the known and the imagination becomes the place where ignorance, or the part of the unknown that is interacted with, becomes congealed in that dream, just as the known becomes objectified, and that in the process of entering into the dream and sacrificing self to the total, that the unknown becomes known, and that everything that we participate in terms of a creation or in terms of an evolution, is exactly like an artistic creation. It is a projection of a dream into the unknown, and in that process there are all sorts of evolutionary stages, and eventually the unknown is drawn more into the fold of the known. That's where we left off. We left off with a promise to return to that theme, which we will this evening after we go through all kinds of other side trips. So we return to Oedipus, who is standing in front of the palace. If it were the path at the rate we're going, he would be old by the time things were accomplished. So he's promising relief, and he's asking questions about the circumstances of the murder of Laius. And toward the end of all of this, he pronounces a terrible, terrible curse onto the murder of Laius, including the fact that either the murderer is going to be executed or driven forever from Thebes, which means that he would not be a citizen anywhere, and he would be left to wander the world as having no home at all. Homeless, so like that thing we read when we were in high school, the man without a country. That sort of thing. We don't have time, but I wanted to go into the pronunciation of a curse, or into the whole idea of something spoken out being different than something kept within, or into the whole Mideastern idea of it is written. But we don't have time for that. But maybe next year, if we get into another topic like the origins of evil or something like that. That's the next topic I want to do, is myths of the origins of evil. So what is happening at this, as Oedipus pronounces this curse, the whole audience literally was drawn into this. Now, this is art of a very high order. Last time we talked about reading and rereading a story to a child because the child needs it. It wants to hear it again and again and again. However, in our grown-up sophistication, we would be bored. That's because egoism is always the source of boredom, because we're too good to hear something a second time. We don't need to hear it again. But it's real art in that people like Aeschylus and Sophocles could tell a story that was several hundred years old. And they told it to a rather sophisticated audience. because the Athenians at that time were pretty well educated. They had their academies of all sorts, their gymnasia, and they were well educated, and they knew the story. And yet, the playwrights could draw them into the story so that they got interested, and not only that, but they got excited about it, and they were really drawn into it. So the Athenians really loved the playwrights and the poets. They loved them so much. I don't know whether it was Poseidonus or Berosus, who was a poet, astrologer that came from Babylon, and he gave them so much wisdom that they made a statue of him with a solid gold tongue in honor of him. But they liked the poetry. Anyway, Oedipus has done a very wise thing without even knowing it. In fact, often our wisest things are done without knowing it. He's asked for help from the ignorant masses. And it's one of the manifestations of the principle of cause and consequence, commonly known as karma, that if you ask for help, you're going to get it. But Oedipus asks for help in a state of ignorance. And he asks, and the very fact that he asks, that produces a silhouette. There's a silhouette between a question and an answer. And the modern philosophers, dreary as they may be in their positivism and such, they spend a lot of time in framing the question, because it really is important, because the way you ask the question puts a silhouette out into the cosmos through which the answer is going to come. Now, because Oedipus is ignorant, that hasn't changed, and when the answer comes, we often don't recognize it. We may miss it altogether, because when we ask a question, we're admitting ignorance, and if we ask it too strongly in our ignorance, we perpetuate our ignorance, and we say, oh, I'm ignorant. Rather than saying, I'm ignorant, enlighten me, we say, oh, I'm ignorant, and we protest too much, and we harden our ignorance, and we get stuck in it. But at any rate, the answer comes, but it comes in a form that he doesn't know it. And my own personal view about it is that when you ask for help, if I pray for help about something, I usually pray also for the humility and insight to recognize the help when it's there, or else I'm way too likely to miss it all altogether. So Oedipus is in ignorance or darkness, and ironically, the answer comes in blindness. That is, his brother-in-law Creon has suggested that he call for the blind seer Tiresias. And he has twice sent for Tiresias, but he doesn't come. And just as he's finishing pronouncing his chorus, his curse to the chorus as the populace, Tiresias appears. He's led onto stage. And Tiresias is a story all in his own. It's probably the only story we're going to hear tonight. How shameful on the story admits. As the story of Tiresias goes, he was walking out in the region of Mount Kithaeron one day when he observed an event in nature that is very seldom seen. Elo's already covering her eyes at this one. It's going to be more Richard Scorpion stuff again. But at any rate, he sees two serpents copulating. And for some reason, intuitive or instinctive, or for some reason, he takes his walking staff and he puts it right between the two serpents. And immediately, he has a flashback, total recall vision, I could use the modern words, a vision of his immediately preceding life when he was a woman. This shouldn't surprise us, because usually we alternate between being males and females between lives. And you can't be a spiritual student and be a sexist or a racist or anything else, because you belong to all sexes, you belong to all races, no doubt, because we've made enough heirs to necessitate enough replications. So we can't possibly hang on to anything. In fact, that's why I sort of have misgivings about men's groups and women's groups and things like that, because very often there's the tendency to accentuate the differences in the groups rather than accentuating the common altruism, the common humanity that we all share. And I think if there's enough emphasis on that, it's all right, but otherwise the differences become too much. But at any rate, he recovers from this experience, and sometime later, I don't know whether it's a matter of months or in a matter of years, he was out walking again on Mount Kithaeron, and what do you know? He happens along the same circumstance. He sees two serpents copulating. And he does the same thing. He puts his staff right in between them, and immediately he has a flashback to the life before the one he just saw before. And in that one he was a man. And he sees the entire whole life all over again. Things go back to normal, but sometimes later, Zeus and Hera are having an argument. Polarities are prone to do that. It's necessity for them in order to manifest their polarity. They have to counter each other. Hopefully something constructive gets built out of it rather than just bickering. And on this occasion, it is again a scorpionic topic. They're arguing about who enjoys the sex act more, those in the female pole or those in the male pole. And because they're each invested in their own pole, they have their identity invested in their pole, they can't see the truth. And they refuse to listen to each other's arguments, so they decide the obvious thing to do is to go and have Tiresias settle the argument for them, which puts him rather in a bind. Who can say no to the gods? And they both, of course, promise him great treasures and things like that for telling the truth, because they're both convinced that they're right. Tiresias happens to be more honest than he is diplomatic, if you know the type of personality. This is usually what is necessary to become an initiate. And he remembers both of the lives. He probably even knows why they alternate as male and female. And the reason has to do with the shape of the earth. Because the earth is, it's called a problate ellipsoid, which means, it's a flattened egg-shaped kind of thing. And it's thicker at the equator. And this produces, this equatorial bulge has gravitational effects. So that as the, let's see if I can, that's a little bit overly much bulged. But as the moon is going around the earth, when it comes to the, when it's going north like this, it has more of a gravitational effect on the bulge than it does on the flattened poles. And that, as the moon comes, it causes the whole earth to pull toward the moon, because the moon has a gravitational effect on the earth, and the earth has a gravitational effect on the moon. So the earth jerks a little bit every time the moon comes near the equator. And then when the moon comes around going the other direction, going back down, it is again drawn in the same kind of jerk. And it is a law of physics that if any action of any kind produces a field around it, or any torque turning action produces a vector of energy going out from it. So that as the earth goes in little jerks like that twice a month, it produces a vector of energy going out opposite or at right angles to the direction of the torque. And this causes the Earth to wobble. It wobbles very, very slowly. It wobbles, one wobble takes 28,868 years. And this wobble causes it to be that as the Earth goes around the Sun, when it gets all the way around the Sun, it has wobbled opposite the direction that it's going, so that the equinox occurs a little bit earlier, a few seconds earlier every year. And as it happens, the equinox goes then, it precedes and it goes through all of the constellations one by one backwards all the way around the whole thing. This is what produces the ages of Aries or the ages of Pisces, like we are now in the upcoming age of Aquarius. And each of those, if the whole cycle takes 25,868 years, it takes 2,100 and something like 46 years for each constellation, assuming that they're all 30 degrees in length. And that means there are 2,000 years that the background of the whole zodiacal influence is Pisces-like, and 2,000 years that it is Aries-like, and such like that. And because we're terribly slow thinkers, and the greatest amount of time in between lives is holding our thought of what we would like to become and what we would like the cosmos to become long enough in order for it to precipitate down to actually becoming flesh and bones in the world around us. We're such slow thinkers. You know, you sit down and try to image something in your consciousness and hold it long enough so that, or solid enough so that somebody else could see that. That's quite something. And so on average, for most people, being as poor thinkers as we are, it takes somewhere between 700 and 1,200 years to come back to birth. Now, the experience of being in a male's body is polar difference than being in a female's body. And so that we get usually, because we're as slow as we are, we usually get one male incarnation and one female incarnation in each of the precessional periods, so that we get to experience the Pisces age once as a male and once as a female, and we get, we have that kind of opportunity before us. So Tiresias has remembered these lives, and when Zeus and Hera come to him, maybe he's even a little proud in his knowledge, and they say, who enjoys it most, the male or the female? Tiresias says there is no doubt but that the female enjoys it more than the male. Modern sexologists, I guess, would agree with him. They say it's deeper and more profound for a woman than it is for a man. But of course, the men try to make up for it by more replications or something like that. I don't want to get off into too scorpionic of things. But at any rate, Zeus is angry, and what he does is he strikes with his thunderbolt, and he strikes Tiresias blind. Hera, on the other hand, has the last word because she was right. And she can't undo what Zeus did, but what she does is she gives Tiresias the insight. She gives him seership, clairvoyance, and she gives him the ability to hear the language of the birds so that he can prophesy things through the language of the birds. Now, it's really important that, polarities, it's not just like we think in electricity, that positive neutralizes negative. There are qualitative differences. And that is to say, it's important that what Hera does is not just neutralize, because there would be no progress. When we have a much more sophisticated view than black and white, and when we can see qualities or the characters of polarity, then we can see that there is progress, and we can learn something different. So what Tiresias does is he gets insight. All right, in this story is a humongous, I hate to do this, but week after week I get greedy. And there are so many things that are in this story, as simple as it may be, that we could spend a whole series of talks on it. So what we'll do is we'll just do a real quick little thing about the fundamental things in the story of Tiresias and then get back to Oedipus. It is, in many ways, the story of Tiresias is a description of some of the major facets of initiation. And a pretty modern initiation at that. When Tiresias puts his staff between the two serpents, he has created, in effect, the universal symbol of all initiation. And that is called the caduceus of Mercury. No. Yes. I'm terrible at spelling. Are you good as good at spelling as you are at math?
Yes, but without these mythological names.
Huh?
I think it's Eros.
What? No, one of the sources that I looked at in Ian and one didn't. Oh. All right, caduceus of Mercury. It is a miniature of the entire path of evolution, because that's what initiation is. Initiation is a microcosmic concentration of the entire path of evolution into a very intense living out of that entire evolution, that entire creation. So then the caduceus of Mercury is a representation of the primordial atom. I have a picture to pass around. It's from a seer called Edwin Babbitt. And it's one of his pictures of what an atom looks like through the clairvoyant vision. And it's the etheric matrix in which particles, electrons and such like that form. And I'll just pass it around, but it itself is a miniature of the great spiral path of evolution. You have to have one picture every week to compensate. The picture is worth 1,000 words, and there's at least 1,000 words in these talks. All right. Oh, we're already on page 2 of the notes. So it might be less than 3 hours and 45 minutes tonight. The caduceus of Mercury consists of a rod or a staff and two serpents that are entwined around it. Now, I don't know how to do this, but, well, let's do it like this. Oops, that's the incorrect picture. So, that's the caduceus of Mercury. It has two serpents. The head of the one with the squiggles on is the black serpent. And symmetrically opposite it is the white serpent. And on top of the staff is a ball with wings on. These are not very good wings, I guess. Which is sometimes called an aegis. And this is sometimes also called a form of an aegis scepter. All of the ancient kings who were initiated into their place by the Mercurians remember when we talked about that a few weeks ago, were held an aegis scepter of some kind or another. The two serpents represent very simplified paths of involution and evolution. The black serpent backs into matter more and more deeply, and the white serpent comes out of matter. I'm sure they have names, but I've never seen the names anywhere. The serpents themselves represent then the paths of consciousness. Serpents were and are symbols in the mysteries of wisdom. The deepest kind of wisdom, the only deeper symbol of wisdom, was the dragon, which was a form of serpent. And part of this is in the way the serpent moves. We all know that if we're passing through space, we want to penetrate or cover as much space as we can, but at the same time not try to solidly block ourselves. And that is accomplished by a spiral, which is what the serpent represents, like a spring. It is linear in that it goes forward, and it is cyclical, so that it doesn't get stuck in one place with just being on an endless circle, and it doesn't have the disposal consciousness of pure linearity. It incorporates both of them. It allows you to cover a great amount of area with great concentration without getting stuck anywhere. In the involutionary path, we pass deeper and deeper into more dense matter. That is, we pass into a realm of thought, a realm of desire, a realm of etheric energy, and finally into the dense physical. And we become increasingly sophisticated in our ability to relate to that matter, in that we begin as minerals that are acted upon, and then we become living plant-like creatures, and then we become animal-like creatures, and finally we become self-conscious human creatures. So all of that in the involutionary path. In the involutionary path, we are creatures, meaning to say that we are worked on by those beings that are undergoing the evolutionary path, the creators. So in the evolutionary half, or probably should say it evolutionary, as in emit or such like that, where we have externalization or coming out of. In the evolutionary path or evolutionary path, we become more and more rare. We spin out of matter. And we become greater and greater creative powers, angel-like, archangel-like, power-like. And we work with the minerals as we are now, bringing them to becoming plant-like, animal-like, and eventually human. What is important in this is that everything that we are was built in us by the gods during involution. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing was accidental. Everything was intentional, and everything was purposeful. And everything was highly, highly meaningful. It wasn't an accident that everything occurred to us as it occurred, that we were brought exactly what we needed to become what we are to become. In the simplest way possible, the things that we experienced when we went through a mineral, plant, animal-like state, those things become creative powers. That is to say, we were valuable and we gave a service in being minerals by getting a kind of resistance that held a form in shape. And it was our very resistance that was valuable. Like the substance of this blackboard is valuable in a different way than the substance of a pear, for example. And it is by producing resistance or by experiencing resistance that we develop the potentiality for manifesting will. Will and resistance work against each other. By experiencing the growth patterns of a plant and being able to take a form and extend it, and to take that form and change it through all kinds of different other forms, that developed within us the ability of imagination. And by experiencing all of the colorful emotions that are represented through animal species, in all of the character of color, we develop the character of being colorful or manifesting unique qualities in spirit as individualities. In our own times, experiences as we began to become self-conscious in our state, rather than being unconscious, deeply unconscious like minerals are, but as we began to become conscious, the experiences of the world were first felt in the involutionary part as memories. And now that where we are this is even another mistake, carried down too far. That where we are now, where we're taking the leap of faith from involution to evolution, from becoming creatures to becoming creators, we are developing a logical consciousness from the extensions of memories of experiences, so that memory leads to knowledge. You watch something a long enough time, you begin to see what is behind it. And when you see what's behind it, you can make a logical connection between all of the parts of the events that you are seeing. All right. So we are now currently in the middle of this gigantic evolutionary creation. We are right here where we're taking a leap of faith because we have no guarantee that we can prove to ourselves anything. We're taking the leap of faith to accept the divine, because we're out here so far in matter that, and the creation is so perfect that it looks like there is no God in it. Scientists say all the time, I don't see God anywhere. It's done so perfectly. It's like perfect art. The artist isn't present at all. And so we're taking that leap of faith to believe that there is something behind it. Now there are two potential paths back out of all of this. One is to leap to the white serpent and to take the evolutionary path. It's slower, more gradual, but easier and more certain. The other is to take the leap to the staff, which represents the express train, or it represents the initiatory path, which is much steeper. It's like going straight up the side of a mountain, no matter what is or isn't there. You just go straight up. It requires an enormous amount of effort, an enormous amount of service, an enormous amount of dedication to go forward. So those are the choices that are available to us. By placing his staff between the two serpents, Tiresias is saying, I am taking the path of initiation. I'm going to take the straight line path where everything comes together. So the freedom that, like when we completed it all, we can fly off like the winged sphere. If I become too boring to you, you can leave at any time. It's just that I'm between you and the door. I'm sure you're not. I'm bigger. I'll move aside. The ends, whether we take the initiatory path or we take the regular evolutionary path, the ends are the same. The only difference is what we put into it. Obviously, if we finish earlier, we can go on and do other things, but, that's talking out of the top of our head. We're already talking through our hat quite a bit. I want to talk a little bit more experientially about this now, because we can't just talk all theory. But even the experiential is going to sound theoretical. We're talking about the representation of the caduceus of Mercury as it relates to our life. Where the serpents meet the pole, those are very important states. They're very important states. They are when the polarity and the direction of things seem to change. These things we can find in our daily lives. It's something like the solstice and equinoxes. That there are extreme points, and then there are crossover points. When we cross over the equator, these would be like equatorial points, and these would be like solstitial points. And there are things that there is a change of state and a change of direction, just like the seasons change at the solstices and equinoxes. You can take the analogy even further. You can take it down to every day. There is dawn and sunset, where there is a radical change. And there is noon and midnight, where there is the extreme of dayness or the extreme of nightness. In the incarnational cycle, which is what we're talking about with Tiresias remembering his past lives, the special points on the caduceus also come to play. There is a point in between lives where we are completely free of all of our expressions. We have no physical body, we have no etheric, we have no desire body, and we don't even function through the concentrative, concrete mind. We are with ourself, we are ourself in spirit. In that moment, we see that even though our self is nothing but an idea, it is a divine idea, and that we are God. And that God puts itself into the entire creation and every being, so that literally we are God. And when we see ourselves, we see the whole creation in ourselves. And the more we put ourselves into that moment, the more everything that is a result of all of our experiences from the past becomes awakened and truly self-conscious to us. And in that moment, we express the desire to participate. And when we express that desire to participate, this is an act of will. And this act of will starts everything spinning. And we begin by thinking out, creating the archetype of what our life is going to be, according to what we've just seen. And we draw together all the materials for our new mental, emotional, etheric, and physical, and gradually we come back to birth. We set this whole process spinning when we say in that particular way, I am, or I will be, We set it all spinning until eventually we come to birth, with great cooperation from our parents, because this physical world is sort of the end of the line, just like it's the end of the line in the caduceus of Mercury. We're so far extended when we're in the external material world that we only have energy to continue to go forward if we share half of it with somebody else to perpetuate the bodies to go forward. And we come to birth. And we still keep spinning forward. We look forward to the time we can go to school, or we can drive the car, or we look forward until we can have our own career. But gradually, that forward spinning slows down and down until the other moment on the cycle, death. And then everything unspins. And as it unspins, everything we put out comes back to us. Everything spins back out into the cosmos rather than into the condensed world that we have created. It comes back into us and it becomes the food for the whole new next cycle. From our experience, we can go forward and create better. But the point is that at the moment of death, just as at the moment between lives where we say, I will be, in each of these moments, we can see the whole of the entire purpose of the life cycle all together. And by entering into Sagittarius and become a Capricorn so that I can be more succinct and less wordy. Can you imagine me as a Sagittarius? Oh my goodness. No, nobody can imagine me. Oh boy. Yeah. All right. In that moment, in third heaven, to the degree of clarity that we can see the purpose, to that degree can we create. And in the moment of death, when we are looking up from the bottom instead of looking down from the top, in that moment, if we accept with complete humility the great equalizer of death, and it isn't so bad, if we look up in that moment, then we can participate all the more fully in the second half of the cycle and draw the most out of it. And we can, in effect, collapse the two moments so that they are as one moment. So when we're talking about the experience of Tiresias, putting the staff between the two serpents, we're indeed talking about the relationship of where there are special moments where things change phase. I'm way ahead of my notes, or way out of my notes here. These moments don't always have to happen at death or in between lives. We know that if we go deep into our concentration, into the moment of experience of right now, we can come to that same universal state where concentration and meditation meet, and we don't have to be in between lives for that to happen. The same is true of the other part. We can, if we recognize it, there are moments in life where there are pauses, where there are balances, where it is like the difference between death and life. And the more we can enter into these moments with full consciousness, the more we can enter into the little death. And the little death is, in fact, initiation. And if we learn to die to our body and enter into the most humble way possible our human estate and all the limitations thereof, we can gradually, consciously reproduce this moment at will, so that any moment can be the moment of creation or any moment can be the moment of dissolution. And so that this is what is indicated in the Tiresias in the placing of his staff. Now that we could talk about a lot of other things, we could talk about spinal fire rising up through neural plexes that are associated with chakras and things like that. But that isn't, those are nice things and we could go into them, but it isn't necessary for where we're trying to get to. I did mention that it was a modern initiation. And the modern initiations are different than the ancient. In that in the modern initiation, much more is placed into the reliving memory work. It didn't used to be that we had as much logic as we do now. We hadn't experienced enough so that we could connect cause and effect or effect in cause. And so as a consequence, the initiation just brought us out of the body, only we didn't understand all of the logical connections. In the modern initiation, we remember as much of our past life, the one we're living right now, as we can bear, because we do have to face everything that we did and everything that we do and all of our self-centeredness and everything else in it. And we remember past lives, but we also remember past epochs of history when we were different human-like creatures. And even further yet, we remember past periods of time going way, way back. And the reason for this is multiple. One of the partial reasons is to extract the soul material. Because the more we can re-experience with that consciousness of death, the more we can assimilate into us with full consciousness so that it becomes a power that we can literally create it. A second reason is that in all of these past periods, in all of our past lives, because God is indeed realizing the dream, God puts all of itself into it. And therefore, when we relive these things, we realize God in ourselves. And we literally are bringing out the divine as it is in us. It's not just soul material, it's much more than that. It is that there is a way of remembering that brings logical consciousness to it, logical in the sense of logos, the creative force that created everything in the beginning, so that it becomes a living power in us. So that is primarily why, and it seems that Tiresias has been pretty good about this. He not only remembers 2 past lives, which is quite an accomplishment, but he's so good in the receptive pole that he has tonal vision. He can hear the language of the birds, which means that he goes all the way into the realm that is called the world of thought, where archetypal thought forms sing to us or speak to us and tell us what they are. And so it's very clear then that his initiation has been quite a deep initiation, and his seership is quite far advanced. All right. Now I'm completely lost. But I'll get... That's the truth. All right. We'll go back to the stage and we'll pick up from there. So Tiresias and Oedipus meet. I was going to read out, but I've already proved how bad I am at spelling, so I won't read, which is even worse than spelling with me. At first, when Oedipus speaks to Tiresias, he speaks in a high-born language that is basically patronizing and conciliatory. and he pleads for help. And Tiresias says something to the effect that the truth can be dreadful, and you must face it with no help. I knew this, so I didn't come on my own, because meaning to say that you can't handle the truth. And Oedipus responds by looking at him and saying, "Why are your eyes so cold?" And Tiresias says, "Let me go home. You bear your fate, and I'll bear mine. It's better that way." And Oedipus starts then bringing on the whole thing. It's your patriotic duty. You have to tell us the truth if you know us this truth. And Tiresias keeps begging off and keeps begging off. And eventually Oedipus gets harsher and harsher and harsher. And finally he says, "You're a faker. You don't know anything." And he eventually accuses Tiresias of being in league with the murderer and, in effect, as good as a murderer himself. At this point, Tiresias says, "You're the man you're looking for. Don't look at me." And he says that you're going to have a terrible thing to face, and he enumerates the facts, saying that the woman that you think is your wife is also your mother, and the people that you think are your children are also your siblings. And he tells him this, and Oedipus gets more and more outraged, and until Oedipus just says, "Get him out of here." And that is the end of scene 1. After 4 weeks, we're at the end of scene 1. However, it is not the end of tonight. Oh, boy. You didn't know what you were getting yourself in for. Has anybody told you how prolix I can be? No, okay, you're finding out, I guess. Last time we spoke about the triangulation of consciousness, and we ended up talking about playing make-believe for keeps or realizing the dream. This is true whether it is a dream that an artist puts out to try and understand the world that he sees around him. He puts out an artistic statement, or whether it is a scientist who tries an experiment and puts forth a tentative hypothesis, which is nothing but a dream, and says, "Can I find the truth from this?" Most often, it doesn't follow the tentative hypothesis, but in the process of interacting through the tentative hypothesis, the scientist does understand more about reality, and the vision that the painter has is almost never what comes out, but still more of reality is understood, and the artist progresses forward, because if the artist stayed with the dream and never did put it out, the artist would never grow. Now, these are prosaic examples, and I put them forth just to show that in our daily lives, the things that we're doing as our occupations involve the same process. We're in this. This is the reality. There's a great danger of getting into the spiritual life to think that the spiritual life is something other than what we're doing right here, right now, every day. And this is it. There isn't any other than this. It's time to look at some of the manifestations of this that are mismanifestations that apply to Oedipus and that apply to ourselves, to me even. And I'm having to admit that very much this very day. The state that we are in is not only a state of ignorance, like the state of Oedipus, but it's the state of materialism. To some extent, all of us are locked in materialism. By materialism, we mean that to some extent we accept or believe that the external material world is the primary reality, the real world. If you don't believe that you're in materialism, just check it out. Observe yourself every day and see how dependent you are on the outer world and how much you believe in its reality compared to the inner world. Some people are so materialistic, they believe that the outer world, the material world, is the only world, and that what appears to be the inner world is just the result of interactions, chemical interactions in the material world, and that our inner consciousness is just some kind of simulation of what's taking place out in nature. Some people are a little further along and they see what is called the mind-body problem and see that there is a difference between the internal consciousness and the external consciousness, the experience between them. But most people who take that view, at least in philosophy, become extreme about it, and they don't believe that there is a connection between the two. Some folks are becoming spiritual dualists in that they realize that within the one thing that is existence, there are many grades of consciousness from the dense, indubitable without to the undeniable certitude within. There are all kinds of gradations. Very few believe or can live out the fact that the external world on this pole, the spirit-matter pole of gradations, is a condensation from the inner. Very few. Few can live it out. How many magicians do you know? Not very many. We mentioned a few minutes ago that the outer world was sort of like the end of the line as far as differentiation or separation or externalization is concerned, and it takes great effort to even come into this world and to continue on in this world. And the further we go on, and the more baggage that we carry from this cycle, the harder it is to aspire spiritually. It really slows down, and it takes a great effort. This is pretty obvious that it's the end of the world. There is no without to the without. We can see that it's the end when you're on the without. We can see that there are lots more within this as you can go within and see things within other things, but you can't go without the without. You see what I'm trying to say? Our materialism is so far at the end of the pole that it is really an external world. Now, there are problems. Not only the shadowy way we perceive the external world, because we perceive it by impingements. We perceive the external world by pain. Neurally, when we're in our body, all sensations are sensations of pain, only we have learned to take some of those pains as being more pleasant. And we say that some of them are indeed pleasurable. There are some problems to this end-of-the-line externalized materialism. And there are problems that go beyond perceptive problems. Like, for example, with extreme extroversion into the external world, some people believe that the good taste is in the apple pie and not in the eater of the apple pie. And even if you are allowed the taste buds, then it's still something external to you. You see what I mean? That you're never really into the experience of it. There are also problems to great of internalization, but they're not as great. The reason being that the further in you go, the more you come to the realms of unity and the more you can come to the place where the truth-knowing consciousness is found. But nonetheless, there are still problems, but I don't want to go into them. This is way too long as it is. So there are the uncertainties of perception and the problems of extroversion. Even though there are these problems, there are some good features to materialism, because being the end of the world, we can see where causes end in definitive effects. It's simple. Even if we look at that refrigerator only from the front, we see that it's a rectangle made of two rectangles. We look at it from a different angle, it looks different, but things are simplified, and there is a poor man's objectivity that we get from the external world. And that's very important. It's testable. And it's solid enough so that we can, in our very ABCDarian consciousness, that we can make progress. In fact, almost all of our progress is made here, because we don't have the objectivity and control to do much in the inner spiritual worlds at this point. We're all over the place. Just try to take hold of your dreams, or just try to be aware and go someplace in your innerness. It's not easy at all. So this is very, very fundamental. Now, these problems with the material world are neutral problems. There are other problems that are much more difficult. Oh, boy, this is hard to go into. It shows a hard topic. We never know for certain what is in the external world. And when we relate to each other through the external world, we're not ever certain that the other, which is part of the one that is coming through that external form, is the same reality as us. If it sees things the same, and even, you know how bad words are, where a lot of our conversation or a lot of our interaction is more misunderstanding than understanding. So there are great problems when there is this much dispersion rather than having a common unity. Things are broken up into so many material facts. If that isn't enough, when we look internally, our internality is, our spiritual being from within is so weak that it doesn't always have the ability to come in contact to what we experience externally and to control it. So our internal being is divided. It's divided as we experience in ourselves of some divine thing that seems so wonderful it isn't really us, and then the us that battles with that. And instead of having a really nice dialogue where things progress and go forward, we have an inner fight. The division wouldn't be so bad, except that we take the lower part of ourselves, the less universal part, as the reality. I'm this, I'm that, which is a kind of inversion. And that in itself wouldn't be so bad, that we take the material and even our internal self-consciousness in an inverted fashion and take the effects for causes. But what has happened is, in our coming into externality and materiality, we have taken not only an inversion, but we have taken a perversion. And that is, we have come to identify with separativeness that is in the material world in such a way that we are, instead of helpful and unifying, we consider ourselves desperado individualists, and we're selfish. At least we're self-centered. If you don't believe that's true, we'll just look at the same way that we look and see how dependent we are on the material world every day. Just take a look at how self-centered our outlooks in our interactions with everything are. And the fact that we are perverted and selfish is pretty obvious from the ad harmony, all of the pollution and destruction and everything else that we do in the world. We turn animals into grotesque things because we selfishly want them to be more productive for us, or all sorts of things like that. So instead of having a lovely lover's communion within ourselves, we have a fight. And instead of having a lovely, harmonious interaction with the external world, whereby we could commune and have Thoreau-like experiences with nature, we look at it as a dog-eat-dog kind of world where we have to overpower nature in that way. Fortunately, something in us realizes that there is this inversion and perversion, and there's something weak about it. There's something weakening about it. In fact, we know that the most self-centered people are often the weakest people. We say that a child that has to manipulate circumstances is a very insecure child, because the only way it can feel secure is by manipulating the environment so it is just what it expects it to be. And in effect, that's what we're doing with science right now. We're trying to manipulate the world to our favor rather than understanding that there is a wisdom in it and working with that wisdom. And we can do that quite creatively without any loss of individuality. So fortunately, we know this, and this keeps us from becoming horribly, monstrous, self-centered individuals. Now finally we're getting to the topic, and we're nearly done. So, the internal dichotomy is weakening. It's time, I think, to return to the topic of realizing the dream. Because that's a principle that is manifest in all levels of reality, just as we saw when we looked at the artist trying to portray nature or the scientist conducting an experiment. The same is true with all of our perception of the external world. We are perceiving, but in the process of trying to see at the same time that we perceive, we give something of ourself. Because we're not just like a camera that takes things in. That is not the way perception works. We can just look like that, but in order to look and see, we have to give something of ourselves. There's even a seership of the material world. You can look at someone's face and you can say, oh, that face looks like a cat smiling. And you say, yeah, that's true. And you have some understanding of what the character is. But when we do that, we are projecting the dream. We are realizing the dream. And if we do that with our inverted and perverted consciousness, problems arise. So we have this habitual attitude of egoism, and we spend a lot of energy defending our ego rather than just accepting ourselves. And we do not always see things as they are. And when we don't see things as they are, we don't really participate in them, and we instead project. That's the whole topic for tonight, is the realization of the dream perverted into projection. The misapplication of the principle of realizing the dream depends on what our character is. It's going to be a little more psychological than spiritual tonight, but there seem to be two primary manifestations of it. If we don't clearly see the external world, or we don't accept it or appreciate it for what it is, because we're withdrawn in our own little world, we're afraid to come out into the external world, we call that projecting a fantasy. Love is the most common example of it. We meet someone, we think we could love them, we perhaps even sense a connection to them. But we're unsure of ourselves if we're of a romantic temperament, of the first type that we're talking about here. We're withdrawn within, and we don't see the person for what they are. And what do? We project our fantasy because the world hasn't been going our way. The world isn't what we want it to be. We'd much rather have our daydream inside rather than an interactive, real, external world. And so we project the fantasy, and usually the other person projects the fantasy on us because we attract people that are pretty much like ourselves. And what do you know? Someone that you could have loved and that could have loved you, you have straitjacketed each other with a fantasy, and you spend the next quite a few years trying to throw off the other's straitjacket. Fortunately, the work gets done anyway, but it would be so much nicer if you could go. The other type of personality does see the external world and appreciates it, sees it for what it is, but it does not appreciate its selfish participation in it from within. And this results in what is commonly called in psychology or pop psychology defensive projection. This is what the case is with Oedipus. Oedipus sees the suffering of Thebes. He's keenly aware of it. He wants to do something about it. And he's presented by Tiresias the seer with the fact that he may be a source or cause of it. And with his egocentricity, he's willing to accept the external world. He's just not willing to believe that there's anything bad or evil about himself. And then what does he do? He says, I'm not the murderer, you are it. And then it is a projection of the internal negative rather than a glorification of the unknown external, as in the case of projecting a romantic type of fantasy. So he's in that position. It's the Republicans. It's the liberals. It's the environmental spiritual wackles that are behind it all. Or the one that the boys always say, she wanted to. It's that cat. I can see by the smile on his sleeping face, it's that cat that is behind it all. So you see what the problem is. Again, I got greedy. It's a topic that we could talk about for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it would be worth exploring, but I just want to talk about it a little bit relative to our daily spiritual lives, because that's where we have to, because I brought the topic up, I'm going to have to deal with it now, and I've known it for weeks. It's been coming on me like gangbusters, And I was just talking about it before class started. My dearest friend in the world is one of the finest Christians that I know. And I asked her once what she does with her spiritual life. And she says, I usually do the thing that I fear the most. And that's the place that I'm at right now. Relative to the problem of fantasy, whether the fantasy is external or internal in the focus of it, there are a lot of problems. Artistic, philosophical, moral. It's very complicated. In many cases, the Republicans and the liberals are culpable and responsible. And they're not only just projections, but they are also culpable at the same time. So it's not a really easy thing to figure out. And there are many degrees of fantasy, all the way from little children playing light make-believe and knowing they're doing it, all the way up to just pure insanity. I don't know if you've ever dealt with somebody that is an out-and-out paranoiac, for example, and what they're seeing in the world is very, very much different than what you and I are seeing in the world. And there is a difference. We just can't give up the whole business because there is such a thing as fantasy. There is a difference between projection and creative imagination. And our whole evolution, the whole of the creativity that we belong to, depends on our developing a true creative imagination. Eventually we'll talk about some of these subjects, but I just want to talk about a few of the very, very simple factors that seem to be involved in fantasy. Or better said, projection. I think it's worthwhile looking every time that there is anything from an uneasiness about a fact or an uneasiness about a situation all the way to downright conflict. And it seems to me that looking or perception is all important. That purity and clarity of observation are necessary. By that I don't mean some standard idea of what purity is, but just looking at things for what they are. And above all, in perceiving, when you try to do it, at least when I try to do it, what I notice is all of these creeping things of my things I want. I feel them coming in. They're the things that get in the way. They're the film. Egoism is the film that obscures the perception so that we're either reflecting off of it or getting a twisted view of what's actually happening. And so I think somehow we have to want to see things as clearly as we can, no matter what it means with regard to ourselves. Sometimes we do act like shits. We just have to own up to that. And sometimes it's really subtle the way we do it. It is in order to get beyond our petty self, it is necessary to indeed get beyond ourself. And I think some humility, facts are very humbling things, and they don't necessarily have to hurt you. Humility is a really wonderful state because there's such a relief. Because again, you're not having to spend all of that energy in defending yourself or defending a point of view or something like that. I work with people who are huge, big ego people. They're continuously, any subject that comes up, they're continuously posturing on it right off the bat. not willing to be humble in the least. It is our responsibility to own up to things and change where necessary. And even if we aren't seeing things clearly yet, it's better to act than to not act. Because if we stay in the realm of projection or in the realm of fantasy, there can be no progress. And it's better to dive in and interact and do something than to stay stuck. One of my favorite things that I've ever read in life is by Dostoevsky. And so it's a little novella called White Nights. And in this, yeah, I read it every now and then. It's the story of a young man who sells his soul. And he doesn't sell his soul to a devil. He sells his soul to daydreaming. And he finds out that the world of daydreaming is ultimately fantastic, but at the same time it is insipid and banal and boring because it's always just what you want it to be, and there is no life in that. But he realizes that he's not completely gone because he realizes that there are people that have real lives, and they have real lives because something fights back. The world fights back, and they're willing to accept the world in its fighting back. And so it's a really lovely little Christian story about the selling of the soul to fantasy or to projection of one sort or another. And I believe that not letting the world implode on us is an extremely important thing when we do detect projection of one sort or another. We are responsible to change. We are responsible to interact, because if there is no interaction, there's going to be no soul experience. We can't test anything if we haven't done anything. And in the process of participating, we develop true creative imagination. We develop that continuity of consciousness that we can take the dream and we can manifest it into the world. And we can appreciate what is in the world in such a way that we can take it into the dream, that the dream is bettered by it. And that is a true creative imagination. The quality of projection will always off somewhere. But with the creative imagination, the application is continuous. It's always in hand. We're always with what we do. And I believe that is that is where our whole of evolution is involved. It is a creative process. And the funny thing of it is there's an ironic paradox in it, in the same way that blind Oedipus is relieved from his blindness by a blind man, is that at the same time that we must become humble from our self-importance in order to see reality, in order to truly see reality in the way that we participate, we have to give ourselves, and we have to give ourselves as thoroughly as God, the Spirit, gives itself to the dream that becomes that in which we are learning to be little dreamers. So that's about as much as I have to say. It's a very, very brief thing. I'm sorry I couldn't do more on it, but maybe we'll come back to it. Next time we're going to do scenes 2 and 3, and then the final week, we're going to meet next week, and then the final week we'll do scene 4 and put together the final synopsis in terms of looking at the classical triangle of father, mother, and creative individual. And then we'll move on next semester to the Isis and Osiris. We got it in under 90 minutes. That's a first this year. Not everybody's going to be paranoid about fantasy. I don't need to be paranoid. I just know it's there. It says, I've been introverting. I should turn this off. This is off the record.